So I had to look back. I have a correction to make. So when I talk about Pam Bondi and her access to, well, she got paid off to get rid of one of the Trump University problems, and when she was a prosecutor down there, she's not the one that gave Jeffrey Epstein a slap on the wrist, though. That was Acosta. Now, I found this really great paper. It's called Jeffrey Epstein, Pedophiles, Prosecutors, and Power. It's by Blanche Bong Cook. She starts off with, this isn't about bad men, though they were most assuredly bad men. It isn't about a system that is void of integrity. Mistakes can happen. But if you don't do anything to stop them from happening again, you can't keep calling them mistakes. The abstract. Jeffrey Epstein, a wealthy white billionaire child rapist, ran an international sex trafficking ring. Rather than prosecute Epstein, Alex Acosta, a former United States attorney, brokered a deal with Epstein's defense attorneys, coined the sweetheart deal of the century. When Acosta abdicated his role as a state functionary and allowed Epstein's defense attorneys to dictate the terms of Epstein's freedom, Acosta gave the power of the state to private parties to protect a recidivist child rapist. The failure to prosecute Epstein is all the more problematic because it sits at the epicenter of mass incarceration. Through its carceral system, the United States disappears persons of color from existence, the political process, and the capacity to reproduce at rates both unprecedented and staggering. Epstein, however, inhabited a body that dictated the unprecedented process he received. Long before law enforcement discovered the scores of Epstein's child victims, Epstein's race, class, and gender, his white heteropatriarchal privilege, incentivized the federal government to decline prosecuting him. Epstein's body prescribed his humanity, while his victims, often poor and female, lacked humanity and received no process. Acosta declined to prosecute Epstein when the U.S. incarcerates more people than any other country in the whole of human history when there is a desire to prosecute. The preferential treatment prosecutors conferred upon Epstein demonstrates the prosecutors' active involvement in the social construction of white supremacy, white heteropatriarchy, white innocence, and black demonry. The failure to prosecute Epstein constructs white male ruling class innocence in the same way that hyperincarceration constructs black guilt. Both are sides of the same hegemonic coin. Epstein demonstrates the ways in which prosecutors distribute premature death in vulnerable communities and life and liberty for the rich and powerful. Epstein dramatically illustrates that white heteropatriarchy is the result of both individual decision-making and structural dynamics within the criminal legal process. This two-tiered system of criminal justice, the one that they're always talking about, their two-tiered system, of criminal justice, life for the powerful and death and destruction for the vulnerable, solidifies calls for abolition. Abolitionism, thus, becomes neither hyperbolic nor hysterical, but rather a measured and reasonable response to a criminal justice system that targets vulnerable communities for cultural trauma and freedom for the powerful. Now this goes on. There's an introduction. I'll read a little bit of the introduction. Jeffrey Epstein, a wealthy white billionaire, child rapist, ran an international sex trafficking ring. His scheme involved child molestation, charges against several powerful white men, specifically Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, a former United States president, Donald Trump. It's Trump. Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz, former New Mexico governor Bill Richardson, former U.S. States Senator George Mitchell, hedge fund manager Glenn Dubin, hotel magnate Tom Pritzker, and the late MIT scientist Marvin Minsky. The full extent of Epstein's pathology and those of his co-conspirators, aiders, and abettors will never be known. Alex Acosta, the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, allowed Epstein to avoid federal prosecution for allegedly raping several children and instead to plead to state charges of soliciting a child prostitute, an oxymoron referring to a child as a prostitute, right? As part of the plea bargain, Acosta agreed to an unprecedented non-prosecution agreement, an NPA, that immunized all of Epstein's named and unnamed co-conspirators. The NPA also allowed Epstein to evade a life sentence in federal prison in favor of a 13-month sentence in a private wing of a local jail. where law enforcement released Epstein daily and allowed him to visit his private office for up to 12 hours a day. Epstein exemplifies the lengths prosecutors will engage to protect wealthy, powerful white male criminals. Epstein ultimately involved over 100 victims. Despite structural advantages that the Supreme Court has created for prosecutors during decades of mass incarceration, internal Department of Justice policies that urge zealous prosecution and an arsenal of prosecutorial firepower caused a decline to prosecute Epstein. The failure to prosecute Epstein is all the more problematic because it occurred when mass incarceration was normative. The United States had perfected its ability to incarcerate by historic proportions. Hyper-incarceration has disappeared persons of color from existence. The political process and the capacity to reproduce at rates both astonishing and staggering. Given the punitiveness of the United States and the structural advantages prosecutors command over suspects, what accounts for a failure to prosecute Epstein? To address that question, this article explores the three central concepts: inversion, distribution, and abolition. I love this article. I would love to read all of it. If you guys would like that, please let me know in the comments, and I will start right here at the beginning. First, white heteropatriarchy. And if that is power as it is raced, classed, and gendered, inverts process. And if you would like me to continue with this kind of content, I love this. I love reading this stuff. Please let me know, and I will get right on it. I'm trying to crawl back out of this dark hole of depression, and this really helps. So thank you for watching and caring.